And we are back, ready to go with round number 2 of the Hearthstone Grand Prix here in Jönköping, Sweden at DreamHack Winter. And joining me for round number 2, Lorinda is going to be coming back for another round, another few matches. I'm going to welcome on my good friend Sottle to the desk as well. How's it going, mate?
Nicest thing you've ever said to me. Wow, incredible.
Yep.
Your good friend. I consider it an honor, sir. I'm delighted to be here, of course. DreamHack events, one of my favorites of the calendar, but more delighted with that compliment from Raven over here.
And now I get to be a punching bag for an hour instead of Raven.
That is how it works, actually. It's kind of a,
That's why I'm so happy.
It's kind of a tier list as to who I look down upon while casting, and I think Lorinda's at the bottom.
Figuratively and literally, but I'll be going away shortly anyway. But like I said, we are in round number 2. We had some cool matches actually to kick off the day. We have like, you know, it's kind of what you described as the competitive standard match between Board Control and Show, and then we had Ecop destroy his opponent with Breakfast Priest. What do you think of that deck? Because you know, obviously me, Admirable, and Lorinda have discussed it now, but let's get your inputs.
I'm not a big fan of the deck. I think people are still playing quite poorly against it. You know, you discussed somehow this incredible point of analysis that you got from somewhere. I don't know where it came from. About
my brain.
Choosing to play Keleseth over Dagger, which sounds like a no-brainer, but against Breakfast Priest in particular, if you do just kill every minion they play, they have such a struggle as to getting a platform. That wasn't done in the matchup against Ecop, and I think ended up being punished. So we'll wait and see long-term when the bracket gets thinner, the field gets stronger, whether Breakfast Priest is still performing well at the end.
Yeah, and I think that might actually highlight between some players the benefit of playing a lot of decks or practicing a lot of decks, even if you think they are not very good, right? Because I played a good chunk of that Breakfast Priest, and then when I played against it, I was like, well, if you just kill stuff, like they don't do anything, right. Even you kill the eggs, like you proc the death rattle, you don't care. It means that they can't keep repeating it and making it awkward. And I know it's something you do quite a lot, Lorinda, is you pretty much just play everything. And do you think there are players here that, you know, do that more than others?
I think, I mean, the pro players have more time to do that. If you're a semi-casual player, an enthusiastic player, you only have time to practice your lineup, and you probably want to practice it against the main decks. That's your time done. If you're a pro player, you should be playing against everything.
Yeah, especially in a field like at DreamHack where we have so many players bringing so many different lineups, and especially in this metagame at the moment as well, because there's so many variations of decks that we even see. But I believe our first match is going to be Pokrovac versus Kufdon, 2 players that we know very well, but maybe you know the general scene, maybe Pokrovac a little bit more so because he's been in HCG and Trinity, for example.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say Pokrovac is a player that definitely started off, you know, in the underground scene, had his first big break at the very first HCT event,
Winter,
I believe. Winter 2016, the first in the current format of HCT. Since then, went off the radar a little bit, but then came back with a splash towards the end of this year. Of course, partnering up with Stan Sifka for the HGG team, and as well as part of Misfits for Trinity Series as well. So the world at whole has been exposed to him a little bit more, but Kufdon, probably a player that we need some Lorinda stats on. Well,
let's forget the stats for a minute, although they are fairly good. This time last year, he made the top 16, played against Super JJ, went 1-0 up and queued the wrong deck.
Ouch.
And ended up getting knocked out. So he's got his chance for redemption here this year, 12 months later. He's a very good player, but I think he's one of those players on the verge of, you know, do I keep doing this or don't I? How long can I go on without winning something? So this could be a big day for him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. And I do think as well, like Kufdon, as you said, he sort of misplayed in the outer side of the game by queuing the wrong deck last year. Luckily, the mistakes like those are ones you don't often make twice. So I imagine...
Well, he didn't make it twice because he was out.
Make it in this tournament, Lorinda. Stop being literal. Guys, it's like casting with 2 Sottles.
That's kind of the point. Except this one gets beaten up by the other one.
Yeah, I was going to say.
2 souls that are mean to each other, but...
we're like spellstones. There's lesser subtle, and then you insult someone 3 times, you upgrade into greater subtle.
So am I subtle then? Am I the in-between? We don't know.
I've lost how this analogy works.
Okay, well, let's reel this back in a little bit. We can see Pokrovac there just getting ready. And as I said, just, you know, no new player anymore, I would say. He has so much experience now, but as does Kufdon. So we see the players. I think that's just the handing over of the bands, the ceremony.
Passing love letters.
I mean, okay, you know a bit better than me. You've actually played DreamHack.
It's actually a tradition. Before every DreamHack game, you have to write a very nice little compliment on a piece of paper and hand it to your opponent.
So what was your compliment to Ecop when you played?
I told him I really admired his beard.
Was that sarcasm?
Yes.
I thought, what was his to you? Was he just like, I got nothing?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Piece of paper, PTO written on both sides.
Yeah.
Wow. It wouldn't surprise me as well, to be honest. But we are just sorting the bans out, so we'll see them pretty soon. And what do you think of this current metagame? We had this discussion when we opened the show, of course. But with so many deck varieties, we saw ball control bring Big Priest.
Yeah.
Which, again, you can't really expect going into a lineup a lot of the time. There's almost an assumption that anyone with Priest is going to be the Raza, Kazakus, you know, big burst damage Priest. But what do you think of the lineups overall, and how difficult is it going to be for these players?
I'm actually surprised that we're at the end of a metagame where the best decks have more or less been decided for a long time. You know, Jade Druid before it got nerfed, long and away the best deck, and then since then, some combination of Druid, Priest, Rogue have been considered the strongest decks. Despite that quite clearly defined Tier 1, the Tier 2 snipe decks, if you like, the decks that you can try and bring to counter one of those out, they've been fluctuating. They've been changing all the time, and that's crazy to see like this deep into an expansion. So a tournament like this with such a huge player field, 260 players, I think, is where we're at. It's so hard to come up with a lineup that not only accounts for the optimal order best ladder deck strategy, but also the breakfast priests, the big priests, the big druids, all of these random things that you could eventually run into.
Yeah, also as well, I was speaking to a lot of players before we got going, and there's a big chunk of players that, because this is technically off-season for HCT at the moment, they have been taking some well-earned time off and maybe haven't been playing the game as much. You put that into the pot of the meta kind of being all over the show, because I actually believe that tournaments sort of impacted the most by the Tier 2 decks as opposed to the Tier 1 decks. We could actually just see anything here. We've already seen E-Cup 3-0 with Breakfast Priest. This is round 1. We have plenty more time yet. I'm very excited about it. Pokrovac is another player who does bring, you know, being friends with Sifka and teammates, can just bring something weird, basically. And it's going to be interesting to see whether he actually does this in this tournament.
You say that, but there could also be that thing of, okay, I'm not playing with Sifka here. I don't have to bring that Sifka nonsense.
Sifka's not stood behind him, like, you know, in his ear.
Stood behind him with a whip. So put some 4/8 Wind Furies in your deck, or you're getting the whip, all right?
This deck could be good with Mukla. You know, you never know. Just throw some bananas IRL and in-game.
Wow.
But what are you expecting from Pokrovac here?
I'm expecting him to bring 4 really solid normal decks. I think the interesting thing for all of these players is we've just seen how the 4th decks have been failing in pretty much everything in round 1. I'm surprised people aren't bringing a deck that's as hard a counter as you can, like a Quest Mage or something. Just in deck 4, it's last hero. If it loses, so be it. Just to try and get 1 win, 1 loss.
If people are bringing Quest Mage, they're going to be down 1 rung on my friendship ladder. But we can check out the bans for this match already. I believe we have them in, so let's have a look. There's Kufdon just getting ready. And we can see the lineups as well. Kufdon with the Rogue, Priest, Warlock, and the Druid banned out. Pokrovac with the Druid, Mage, Rogue, and then Priest banned out. So again, we see sort of different bans coming out based on the lineups, I imagine.
Yeah.
But what does is Pokrovac not going to be my friend anymore? That's my question to you. So, do you think Quest Mage fits in this line?
I mean, possibly. I do also think that Good Mage, you know, the thing that we've gone through about a million different names for.
Magey Mage?
Yeah, you know, Burn Mage, all of those different
Jaina Mage to a certain extent.
That just kind of, you know, value late game Mage is actually quite an underrated deck in my opinion right now, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that either.
I do think paired with the Druid ban from Kufdon, normally if you're bringing Quest Mage, you are happy at playing against Druid.
Right. Druid ban against Kufdon, you mean?
Yes, yeah. So it's like if you play Quest Mage versus Big Druid, I actually struggle to know how you lose that matchup.
Sure.
It's so insane. So I think, you know, I do agree we might see that. We might even see a tempo mage. So we'll find out. But there's no need to wait any longer, actually. The players are ready to go. So Sol and Lorinda, it's all yours.
Two great players getting ready to go, and I think this kind of matchup that we're looking at, Lorinda, might just be the story of this DreamHack, because of various reasons, various other tournament obligations, a lot of the most successful DreamHack players aren't able to make it here, especially those who've just been attending the DreamHacks you've been watching recently, you know, Denver, Atlanta, etc. They haven't been able to make it because it's not their circuit anymore. We're in Europe again.
We're back.
So suddenly, there's all these incredible European players that we know very, very well, following the scene. It's kind of our job to do so. That's going to be the story, I think, for me going through this tournament.
Yes, somebody's going to pick it up, but let's pick up the action and see how game 1 goes down. And Kufdon starting off with the, well, control-looking Warlock with that Defile in the hand.
Yes, Defile being the giveaway there. Siphon Soul as well being mulliganed away. Voidwalker and Dreadlord, of course, would be in Zoo Warlock as well on the majority of the occasions. But Pokrovac on his side, looking like a pretty standard rogue list from what we see. Saronite Chain Gang has become more or less standard these days. It was one of the cards that wasn't in the earliest builds, but it's found its way in. Of course, it does have that amazing buff synergy with Keleseth, and just on its own, you know, 4-mana Feral Spirits with no overload. Yeah, sure, we take those.
Ever since they lost Tomb Pillager, Rogue's been really flapping about trying to find anything to do on turn 4. I mean, they played the 4-mana Prince for a while just to do something.
It's not going to have that problem in Kobold and Catacombs, I can tell you that much. There's
4-4.
There are a few options they can be busting out on turn 4 now, but in the meantime, you're right. They're scrambling to fill that spot. It's why we've even seen Prince 4 come into the deck.
You've got to get to turn 4 in Kobolds versus Catacombs. Maybe 4 mana just turns out to be too much for anything. Fantastically exciting looking set, actually, for multiple reasons. All right, this early game then. So Kufdon can go as slow as he likes, as long as he doesn't take too much damage. Damage equals cards, as always, but looks like he's going to be able to withstand the early threats. That Siphon Soul going to be key, how he chooses to use it, which minion he targets with it.
Yeah, can potentially line up against a Scalebane, although that's not perfect because Scalebane actually spreads its damage that way. It's one of the situations why a lot of people favor Scalebane over Bittertide Hydra, for example, because it does spread the threat a little bit better. But of course, Lich King has come into this deck more and more recently as a staple at the end game as well. So that could be a huge hit for that Siphon Soul if it does land.
Interesting you mentioned the Lich King. Like, when Lich King was spoiled originally, all those months ago now, I think we all thought Lich King, oh my goodness, this card's insane. And now it's in every deck.
Yeah.
But it's taken 3 months to get to that point.
Well, I mean, for week 1, we did see it in every deck. And there was Black Knights and Big Game Hunters occasionally as well being played to counteract the Lich King. Then the Lich King went away for a period, but now it is back with a vengeance, as you say. And
it's strange with Bone Mares and Lich King pretty much everywhere. It's kind of interesting that Black Knight never came back. Maybe we'll see that later in this tournament as this game develops into the more interesting turns where Kufdon's going to have to start as you're having to remove stuff.
A double Defile, Hellfire, Siphon Soul in his hand, so Kufdon definitely not shy on removal right now. Does have the Geist as well, which is going to nail some Cold Bloods, at least, from Pokrovac's deck, reduce some of the damage output. But Kufdon, as you can see, leaving the Druid up, part of that reasoning probably being the Geist that he's packed into his decks to do so.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. One of the things with this deck is it does have plenty of spaces for tech like that.
Yes.
It sort of puts in, I don't know, 15 removal spells, number produced straight out.
That sounds like a lot.
It has a lot of removal spells, but a lot of sort of things that don't do much. So you do have a lot of room to maneuver. Geist, definitely counter to the Druid. Is it a counter to the Druid? It's just not, is it?
It's not a counter, but it definitely helps. You can certainly win matches as J-Druid after you've been Geisted. It's infinitely possible, especially due to the power now of Ultimate Infestation.
And it's okay against Priest, some people think. I'm not convinced by that argument, but it removes enough stuff against Priest to annoy them.
I mean, it's huge against any kind of Inner Fire Priest.
Sure.
Which is now a thing that we're dealing with.
We are, indeed.
But Kufdon actually choosing to ban the Priest, so that's not going to be a big deal for him. But he is here going to coin the Scalebane, and it's no additional minion on board to spread the power, as I was talking about earlier. So it does look like a very clean answer. And he did draw the Twisting Nether on this turn as well, which means if he does need to deal with Lich King later on, if it gets to that point, he does have that answer with the Twisting Nether if need be.
One thing he hasn't managed to do yet is... Sometimes you see players playing Control Warlock who find a clever way to clear one board and preserve all their stuff. So Kufdon's had to do it the old-fashioned way. He's Hellfired the board with 3 health minions. He's siphoned the 5/5. All things that are absolutely fine, but you find sometimes when this deck does really well is you have one turn where you find a sneaky way to save one of those cards for later.
And often that comes down to Defile. Like, you really do have to look out for when you can make the Q plays with Defile. You know, can I drop a Voidwalker or a Mistress of Mixtures onto this board of my own that creates a new breakpoint for Defile? Now we see Kufdon sitting on 2 Defiles in hand, which are much, much more situational cards than the Siphon Soul and Hellfire that he's used already. So that might be a great point. Might be something that we have to look out for here from Kufdon as to whether those premium removals that he's used can come back to bite him. I like this play, though. We were just talking about the potential for these Defiles to get stuck in his hand. That's not great value. It just kills the 1/1s, but it does now contest this board very nicely with the Stonehill Defender running into the SI7.
Just taking the biggest available taunt here. I think it must have been tempting, but he just wants as much health as possible. And basically, taunt health equals health unless you're playing against mage. Minions actually have to do the damage at some point.
Quickest turn of Pokrovac's life. See Bone Mare, play Bone Mare.
And there's a Mortal Core. This is a little bit of a reward from early on, I think. Now he's going to... Ooh. Again, he's still sort of not finding... And this isn't his fault. I think it's the setup of the deck, but he's not finding creative ways to either buy time or to postpone stuff. There's Twisting Nether coming up next turn.
Yeah, I think if you actually look through this turn over the course of the next 3, this is an attempt from Kufdon to give himself one of those creative plays to save resource. He wanted to take power off the board that previous turn, so that this turn he could potentially just play Lich King, and that contested.
Right.
Then that, over the course of 3 turns, saves his Twisting Nether for later on. The Cold Blood push from Pokrovac, though, prevents that from even really being an option. Not to mention, Kufdon's always got to fear that Vilespine Slayer when he tries to make that play happen. And on top of all of that, Pokrovac has a Blast Crystal Potion stocked up and ready to go as well.
Yeah, not looking good for Kufdon at this point, but Pokrovac hasn't quite got enough damage on it again. Kufdon having... Again, there's nothing wrong with these plays. They just... Right. He's trying to find a way to save these cards and not managing it.
Well, 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 sir. You have Leroy Shadow Step in your hand, but your opponent has used double Siphon and a Twisting Nether, making a huge Edwin Van Cleef very appealing. So where does that Shadow Step get allocated? I do like this. 6/6 is enough to set up lethal for you here anyway. Holds onto the Shadow Step for the Leroy damage. I think this is almost certainly the best line.
Yeah, he can also Shadow Step the Vilespine if needed as well. To
right.
Force things through, so he has the double option there.
Very true. Does have the Blast Crystal Potion, though, so he can normally make that happen without, depending on what he draws.
Kufdon, though, he hasn't played many demons this game, so Gul'dan not quite as useful as usual. Usually you forget the demon aspect, but when you're taking a beating, you do need those Void Walkers to slow it down a bit. But one turn away now from potentially getting back into this, because Gul'dan is a pretty crazy card when you start killing off rogue minions. If you clear the board, most of them just die to 1 shot from Gul'dan from the new ability. 3 damage to a rogue minion tends to kill it.
It does. It's 1 turn, as you mentioned, though, that Kufdon needs, and that's 1 turn that it's really not looking like he has here.
How do you even approach it? If your opponent has 3 blank cards in their hand, what do you do here? That's how he's got to look at it.
But he knows 1 card is potentially a blank because it's a random Warlock card. And you don't have to give your opponent credit for that card actually doing anything in this situation. But yeah, I didn't see a more appealing play there than the Lich King. But unfortunately, Blast Crystal Leroy is going to end this game sharpish for Pokrovac. He's curved out very nicely. Kufdon was desperately scrambling through his AoEs, and he just left himself, as you were saying the whole game, that 1 resource short at the end, which meant Pokrovac stuck a board, and the Blast Crystal Potion pushed him through that Lich King at the end, 1-0 for Pokrovac.
Deck number 4 loses again. People are, I mean, how do you see this? Like, do you build your 4th deck to just keep losing?
Right,
or do you build it to counter 1 thing?
Before we get into that, you've used the phrase 4th deck a couple of times. Just explain what you mean.
So I'm going with Highlander Priest, Tempo Rogue, and Jade Druid being the big 3.
Right.
There are variants on those, but even if you play the variants on those classes are still the big 3 classes. And then you need to find a 4th deck. And it's Tier 2 decks are so far behind Tier 1 decks that the 4th deck tends to get wiped out.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking a lot here is you can build your 4th deck so it has a very specific purpose, just to counter 1 other deck, maybe get a 70% against something.
Yep.
Like try and run a Quest Mage into a Priest, and settle for the fact that your 4th deck is never going to go through their lineup.
Yes.
Just never going to wipe them out. So just, most players seem to be taking a 4th deck they think can get more than 1 win. I'm wondering if it's best to use that 4th deck slot just to try and get an 80% chance of 1 win and just deal with it. Just get 1 and 1 out of it.
One additional problem that I want to throw in on top of everything you've mentioned is that the 4th deck, as you're putting it, you have to play it because that's one of your top 3 decks is going to get banned.
But you don't have to win with it, so it's like a free shot.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the logic. I don't like the fact you're advocating for Quest Mage because that deck can die in an icy fire.
And it will.
Very true. But yeah, I definitely understand the logic of trying to use a deck like that to hard snipe. And Giant Wasp, Neil, a card that I happen to know you're quite a big fan of.
Yeah, and I think it might come into play here as well. Giant Wasp, a card that basically acts as a very slow second death when you're playing against mid-range decks that pack full of Hydras and Flappy Birds.
Yes.
Because you run out of removal. It doesn't matter if you take 1 damage for 8, but you can't take 8 3 or 4 times. And in this lineup, it might work out quite well for Kufdon because he will be able to deal with that Flappy Bird without particularly interfering with his own game plan.
True. There is counterplay, though, because the bird is landing first. If it now picks up Divine Shield, it's in business, potentially.
Yeah. Or stealth, I mean, there's definitely ways around it. It's more aimed at the Hydras, but it's just that Priest doesn't quite have enough answers from turns 3 through to 6 a lot of the time.
And this is a point I wanted to add as well. Not only is it just such a great tool for removal, there's the Divine Shield, by the way. Not only is it such a great tool to actually answer a board state, things that get developed preemptively, it's also a guaranteed target for that Cabal Talon Priest to land.
Right.
And Kufdon picked up the Talon Priest on curve here, so he's going to make that Giant Wasp a huge persistent threat. But speaking of huge persistent threat, Flappy Bird is a terror. And I want to mention as well that as soon as Flappy Bird came back into the Rogue deck, it was tried very early, then it was dropped back out again, then it was brought back in. The win rate against Druid and Priest skyrocketed because of this one card, because it's so hard for them to deal with. Priest has 1 Pain, and Druid has Wrath. That's it.
For me, yeah, I mean, that's good, though. That's ask the questions that those decks need to struggle against. Originally, I thought this card was too powerful because it was too swingy, but actually, if there's decks that suffer to it, that are slow, good. We want those people to suffer. This, to me, is how Highlander decks should be. I think Priest has too many options, which makes it overpowered right now. But if you're scrambling to find something like Giant Wasp to make your deck work, that for me is how I like Highlander decks to be. It works, but let's face it, it's not an ideal card. It took people quite a while to put this into the Priest deck, and it still doesn't go into many of them anyway.
I want to go back and rewind this to the early game turns. I'm not calling this out as a misplay by any means. I'm just examining the implications of the play that was made. Kufdon used a Potion of Madness to clear out 2 1/1s on his turn 2 when he could have just developed Loot Hoarder. And because of that, now if you look at his potential Potion of Madness setup, he would have dealt with Flappy Bird this turn if he still had a Potion of Madness in hand. So it's always worth looking back on those kind of things. Obviously, Potion just to kill 2 pirates when Pokrovac could have coined Southsea Captain, for example, instead of coining the bird.
Right.
You cannot call that out as wrong, but it's always interesting to look at how games have developed because of decisions players.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the pro players in particular, they'll play hundreds of games in that situation, and they won't be able to, even if you look at the maths of the situation, the sample size is usually too small, but what they do is they build a picture of how the game's played out and get a feel for, should I be trading the pirates here, or how often does this get punished, how often does it not get punished?
Right.
And his instincts have told him that it was the right play. My instincts tell me that's the right play as well, by the way. When I can't see the hands, I think I trade off those Potion of Madness turn 1 as well.
I think I probably would as well, yeah.
Because you don't often get a chance to slot it in there, because first of all, Rogue might play Keleseth, which means all the minions are out of range of Potion of Madness.
Sure.
And secondly, he had a fairly good curve for his hand, so there might not have been a chance to slot it in until like turn 5, by which time it loses a lot of its power.
Well, I would contradict the curve point, because he actually forced himself off curve by playing the Potion of Madness. He was more mana efficient by playing Loot Hoarder that turn. I do agree that, you know, just taking the target when you get it against a deck that scales very heavily. The minions get big very quickly later on in the game. In the meantime, while we were having that extended discussion, Kufdon did pick up the Silence, which helped him answer the Flappy Bird problem, and he now has swung the problem-solving back onto Pokrovac, who has to deal with this very irritating 2/4 Giant Wasp.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty easily dealt with, though. Kufdon also playing the Holy Fire. That's another card that we've seen rotate in and out of this deck. It's currently mainly in, as the extra 5 health has become more and more needed, as the decks have evolved to sort of beat it. Try to. And contrary to what I was saying about the Warlock deck, this Priest deck has like 2 spaces for your decision-making cards. And they were recently generated by the removal of Shadow Word Horror.
Yeah, I'd say it's a couple more than 2, but yeah, there's some flex spots. You know, are you playing Auctioneer or Lyra, Master Spell or Gnomish Inventor? You know, you're playing the Novice Engineer in there as well. Some people even leave out Mind Blast. There's a couple of spots, Holy Fire, Binding Heal, or Greater Healing Potion as to what your burst heal is. There's a few spots, but yeah, this deck has been played so much to this point that it's one of the most refined decks in the game,
so
basically.
Good.
Really?
I like this deck.
You do? Really?
Yeah.
That surprises me.
It's not a me deck normally, but I do like this deck.
Okay, I'm glad you at least acknowledge that it's not a Lorinda deck, because I like to think I know you pretty well, and this feels like...
Sadly, yes.
This feels like a deck that you would usually hate.
Yep. I hate playing against it.
Sure.
But there's so many The problem with the understanding the deck is there's a lot of nuance to it, but usually the nuance just gets lost when you hit someone in the face for 28.
Shadow Vision's giving the slightly sad options of a Backstab or a Shadow Step as the only remaining spells in Pokrovac's deck, but this Shaku is a very nice pickup because he was going to struggle to land that Bone Mare any other way. The Dragonfire Potion had come down to deny the board state, and now that Stealth Minion in play means that the Bone Mare is going to land, and it's cross your fingers time, buddy. If you have the Anduin, I'm in trouble. If you don't, I'm in business.
Yeah, and people can learn from this sort of play. Sometimes you just have to do it. You know, you can out-clever yourself in these situations sometimes.
Right. And one way you could very easily out-clever yourself in this spot is to use one of those Shadow Steps on a Bone Mare because you are scared of Anduin coming down and nuking your board. Pokrovac not falling into that trap. He is just saying, hey, if you have it, sure, I'm in trouble. I got my win out of Rogue. You hit me with the counter pick. I'm willing to accept that.
And Kufdon hadn't drawn a whole bunch of cards. That can definitely factor into his decision here. He's only drawn 2 or 3 additional cards.
Right.
So even though it always feels like they play turn 5 Raza, turn 8 Anduin, they don't always, actually. Plus also Pokrovac does have the slight, I don't know, saviour that there's been no Raza either. So if he does get Anduin, his bounce back might at least empty Kufdon's hand out.
His bounce back ability. Classic English word.
Yeah. Well, I'm an English caster. You were once.
What does that even mean?
So you'd know if you were still English.
Okay, fair enough.
Pokrovac, again, being rewarded for how he played the previous turns. And these cards from Shaku,
all right.
I mean, they've been good, but it doesn't matter if they're bad, really. They're just cards that you need. You just need something a lot of the time to get that extra piece of damage through.
Yeah, he is finding himself a pretty sick value engine off that Shaku. I talked about how important the Stealth Minion was to land the Bone Mare. The other side of that is that he was so low on resources. I think 3 cards in hand, 2 of them were Shadow Steps. So picking up a value engine like Shaku was massive for him as well. And the Shaku itself has then generated more value engines.
I've already said this once today, so it's going to labour fast, but I think this is one of the more interesting matchups to watch because it plays out differently so many times.
Agree. Yeah.
Like every game is just different somehow. Even though we've watched it thousands of times, it still seems to work out slightly differently. And then you get decisions like this. What's even happening? Psychotron. More Divine Shields means more things have to hit it. Really obvious statement. Oh, there is the Bittertide Hydra, so the Giant Wasp in this particular matchup was at least a really good meta call. That's exactly the card you want to run it into if you can.
Sure was, and I love Pokrovac more and more. Bittertide Hydra is a card I run in this deck every single time I play it.
How many?
It's criminally underplayed, 2.
You run both of them. What do you drop? 1 Scalebound?
It depends on meta. If I'm running like purely into Druid and Priest, I'll run all 4. If I'm playing against more aggro, then I'll drop 1 Scalebound a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's going to work out pretty good for him here by the look of things. And this is the thing. This is the point of the Hydra. It's just even more overload. Rogue playing Secrets. Didn't think he could do that yet.
Motion of Polymorph is going to deny something like a Velen Spirit Lash, for example. It's going to deal with a Raza problem. It'll deal with a huge taunt coming down. Great timing as Pokrovac sets up his lethal push to just set down 1 more hurdle. And no, sir, your Velen is a sheep.
Can you heal for 4 with a sheep? No, you can't. Kufdon realizes it and decides to give up.
And 2-0 for Rogue. I believe this is the exact same start we saw Ball Control getting off to. Is that correct?
Yeah, it didn't end that well, though.
It did not, no.
He got a Druid in the face from that point on.
Sho proved himself to be very good at drawing Wild Growths, Jade Blossoms, and Nourishes.
Remember when he used to play Warrior? How he's changed.
I know.
He'll be so disappointed in himself when he wins this tournament.
A lot of the classical old-school Warrior players, so we're diverting a little bit, 2-0 in the series, but last hero standing, we know what the next matchup is going to be, pretty much. So Sho and a lot of the older Warrior gods have been saying that like the Warrior cards that are coming out are a lot more exciting than they've seen for control Warrior cards in the past. I know Fibonacci in particular was like, this is great, you know, late game options for Warrior that don't just involve just a card tank up pass. So interested to see where late game Warrior goes. In
Control Warrior mirrors are going to be back.
Maybe.
Good.
You're a fan?
If I'm watching.
Okay.
If I'm casting, can we just not do that?
Sure. Patches drawn from Kufdon. Unlucky.
However, he's got the cold blood and a lot of other stuff to go with it, so even though it's still a disaster, and mathematically, at least he's got a way to use it for something.
Yeah, and Shadow Step, Coin, and Edwin in combination in his hand, meaning he can get a huge Edwin down even before Vilespine Slayer is a threat. So actually, overall, his hand is maybe even looking a little bit stronger than Pokrovac's in this spot. That Firefly will have something to say about that potentially, though, because that's now a much-needed combo activator for the SI7 in hand, as well as for future turns as well.
It's a nice little curve filler as well. He's not going to drop any mana unless he wants to for any time looking forward now till about turn 7. And that's so important when it's all a tempo-based game. You want to spend all that mana every single turn, even more than usual. Huh. I mean... Okay, so he's going to protect the Flappy Bird as much as he can, I feel, by the look at this. You can't hold on to it too long, I don't think.
Yeah, it's just not a great deal of stats, you know? Like, Backstab takes care of it, a comboed SI7 agent takes care of it with the preloaded dagger. Like, you want to just play stats on board here. This isn't a matchup where you're just threat-checking your opponent, saying, can you kill my bird? If not, I win. It's a matchup where you do really have to play for long-term tempo over a series of turns. So more stats in play with the Tar Creeper certainly makes a lot of sense.
Long-term tempo over a series of turns, or just make them world's biggest turn 3 Edwin.
That does tend to work also.
This pretty big Edwin. Willing to take the damage there as well to set up for next turn.
Yeah, also decides 10-10 is enough, so that he now holds back the 0 mana Patches in hand for another utility card, whether it's a combo activator, whether it's to combine with Cold Blood, or even if he doesn't get any value out of it for a long time, he can pick up a Bone Mare and just slam those things together on turn 7.
Yeah, it's a mistake to go for too big an Edwin in this matchup because a lot of the time it only sits there for 1 or 2 turns. It can do a lot of damage, so you want it to be large. It can also just win the game if it doesn't die to Vilespine, so you've got to make it big enough that it does that. But just burning cards for no particular reason, not worth it.
Yep, definitely agree.
Yeah, this, like you were saying earlier, there's an interesting point about this is a really big opportunity for some of the bubbling under players to really make their name finally into the public eye. I think Pokrovac is just about there. Kufdon has been around for a long time. I feel he never quite had that big result.
Yeah.
Which is why last year's DreamHack Winter was such a tragedy for him. Everyone knew who JJ was already, and he always loses in the top 8 anyway, because that's how he rolled for all that time.
And I think Pokrovac in particular is a phenomenal player. I think if you look at the Czech HGG team, a lot was made of Stan Sivka's impact on that team. You know, the team themselves confessed that Sivka was pretty much the shot caller. He had approval of basically every play that they made throughout the tournament. But I think, honestly, that was just an experience thing more than anything else, because Yala and Pokrovac, 2 of the other players that are on that team, are just about as good as it gets. And I think they are on Stan Sivka's level, if not, you know, arguably stronger.
Yep.
Czech Cloud, the odd one out, would probably confess himself that he was the weakest player on
Although
that
he
team.
put in a lot of effort for that tournament. I mean, it'd be very easy for the streamer in the team to sit back, put their feet up and say, you guys win me some money.
Right.
But he didn't do that. He really put in the time to make sure he got as close to them as he could.
Yes, but I think, you know, Czech Republic deserving world champions based on the strength of their team overall, and Pokrovac, who we're looking at now, was a very big part of that.
Right, so Pokrovac just going, not quite through the motions yet. This is by no means over, but trying to deal with that Edwin, or make it so that the Edwin is like overwhelmed. And needs to deal with it if he possibly can, because he will just be too low. There's too much little bits of burst in the deck if he doesn't.
That feeling when you make your opponent trade their Flappy Bird.
I've never had it.
Really?
Yeah, they just trade it into my face and then hide it most of the time.
You need to get good, Neil.
I know. I figured if I just maybe have a month off and start on the 30th, I'll be able to beat people again.
Fair enough.
Okay, Kufdon. That Edwin has done a lot of damage to the hand size, but probably not enough. Pokrovac just seems to have the better of this tempo-wise.
He does, but he doesn't have a lot of health to play with, and that's a huge deal in this matchup because your dagger tempo This is something that you were talking about in Ball Control's matchup earlier on when he used his dagger so effectively, making sure he had 2-charge dagger up a lot of the time. That's so important in tempo-based matchups, but when you don't have the health to play with to use that dagger to affect breakpoints, that makes it harder to keep a grip on the board. And because Pokrovac's down below 11, a Leroy draw at pretty much any point from Kufdon threatens to end the game.
And that's why this is such a difficult turn for Kufdon to think about. It's how long have I got? Can I get this through? Do I need to do any trading, or can I hit face? Well, if you don't trade anything here, you're a brave man. It might be okay for him.
If you don't trade anything here and Pokrovac bone mares his Flappy Bird, then you are losing that race, right?
Yeah. But if you start trading with this limited resources in hand, maybe you don't get there anyway.
Very true. Tough spot.
And it looks so simple to just look at the situation. Oh, this is kind of okay.
He does have the option of going face looking at it, but he would be relying on picking something up to combo that Vilespine Slayer that would take care of the Bone Mare Taunt. From his perspective, of course. We have caster vision, we see no Bone Mare in hand, but that's what Kufdon is thinking about here. Priority number 1, what kind of impact does Bone Mare have on this game?
And he grimaced there going into this turn 7. That's the kind of impact it has. It makes your opponent wince even when they haven't got it.
Now look at this. Both players so tunneled on the threat of Bone Mare. Pokrovac choosing not to play a 5-6 here, just developing a 1-2 and a 3-3 instead, just to make sure there's no target on board for a Bone Mare to come back the other way. That Vilespine Slayer has been hanging around in Kufdon's hand for a little while, making Pokrovac think there is a high chance of that being a Bone Mare.
This is a pretty silly pickup here for Kufdon. He needs one more mana for this to be the best hand ever. As it is, it's just awkward.
Yes.
He's got time, though. He needs to remember his opponent has 1 card. He knows it's probably not Bone Mare.
He knows it's definitely not Bone Mare.
In fact.
Because it's a random rogue card.
Yeah. Good point. Why is that in the deck?
Yep.
And yeah. Looking like he might just sneak back into this.
Ooh. Now we're in business. Again, continuing. That same card that I've been talking about, that Vilespine Slayer, is sat in hand, and Pokrovac is still respecting that as a Bone Mare.
We won't respect him much longer if this is a cheap pickup.
It has to be. The whole deck is cheap at this point. Oh, never mind. That is cruel.
I think the deck's sneaky expensive.
Sneakily expensive.
So there's 1 4-drop usually, or 2.
It's probably a Lich King.
There's 1 2-drop. Then after the 4s and 2s have gone, actually, there's not that many 3s and 1s.
He's still got his Fireflies, right?
Yeah, he's got a bunch of stuff. Don't get me wrong, he's probably like 50-50. But
Yeah,
I don't think it's like 70-30.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
So Pokrovac, this would be a good time to pick up Bone Mare. Well, we saw the damage Shaku could do last game.
We did.
And this does start the clock ticking, basically because of the value he's going to get next turn.
Right. And again, Stealth Minion. Kufdon is just not finding a turn for this Vilespine Slayer. Last turn it was mana restriction. This turn it's a Stealth Minion.
And at some point, when do you say my opponent is so low on health, I just play it and hope he doesn't draw his Bone Mare?
It's an excellent point. I mean, if you can dagger face this turn, then, you know, your Leroy pickup is lethal regardless.
Yeah.
The other thing you have to think about are your Cold Bloods, of course, if Kufdon even has them. I think there is definitely merit to getting a 3-4 in play.
One of the hardest things in Hearthstone is when you get capable at the game is to start ignoring card text.
He's not doing it. If he was going to do it, he would have played it first,
yeah,
because he's activated the combo, would have to destroy his own minion.
Pokrovac is going to get so many cards this turn. This will swing the game, potentially, if he gets anything half good.
Oh, what were you saying about so many cards?
More cards!
Yeah, I like Swash first. Get yourself a Valera. No. Oh, okay, there's a clock. Let's go. Maybe we play Ken instead. Fair enough.
Started off with so many uncertainties, and the ordering mattered there, because if you do it in the wrong order, the Cairn doesn't get played.
I was just going to say, you guys have just seen the power of sequencing there, and why all of that was so important to be done in the order that Pokrovac did it.
Head crack. card that everybody always thinks they're going to make work when they pick up Hearthstone. Maybe Pokrovac has cracked it. You get it when you need 2 damage.
Can coming down the other way. There is 10 damage in play, including the head crack.
So, Pokrovac needs to make a decision where he's going to put this Shaku, because there's so many lethals he can find here.
Yeah, Shaku goes face, for sure. Lillian Voss re-rolls the head crack.
Order this. Oh, wow.
I think you head crack, lose the head crack, and then Vile Spine half of the can, and then trade through the rest of the can. I believe you still then have lethal set up on board. Yes, you do.
And you're putting him to Leroy only, pretty much.
Exactly. Oh my, he is going to re-roll that head crack. Thistle T. Okay.
Thistle T, surprisingly ungood in this situation.
Oh yeah, I'm dumb. This play is just better, because you front load the 4 power instead of just dealing 2 with the head crack, and you potentially give yourself a better utility spell with the re-roll. This play is much, much better than using the head crack.
Still nothing for Kufdon. How has that gone? But he did choose not to play the Vile Spine.
He did.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's something that he could have done that would have done a lot of damage by now.
I think that's definitely something that needs looking at, for sure. And now Pokrovac will fear that that card that he's been crediting as a Bone Mare the whole time was a Bone Mare. You saw his reaction there as the deckhand Bone Mare in his own mind came out. That would have been a lethal combination, but it was Vile Spine Slayer, not the Bone Mare in the end. So Pokrovac gave the sigh of relief, picks up a clean 3-0 in the first round, and that just goes to show the power of Tempo Rogue.
Yeah, this Rogue deck has been doing wonders now for several tournaments, and that's why it's so hard to leave it up. But then, you've got to. I think it's right to leave Rogue up. You've got to do something about it, though.
Yeah, I think specific lineups, if you're bringing kind of the Druid and Priest counters as much as you can throw that out, the big Druids, the big Priests, the Quest Mages, those kinds of things, then maybe you're banning out Rogue to compensate for that. But for the most part, you have to get rid of one of Druid or Priest.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting environment where banning those 2 together would be so great for you if you could do such a thing and just leave at 1. But so that's why Rogue sometimes gets banned. Rogue's just tearing through tournaments.
So series overall, I think it's fair to say you know a little bit more about